The grand hall of Ravenshire Manor had never been so brilliant. 500 candles burned in bohemian crystal chandeliers, trembling golden light pouring down onto the marble floor. Servants in crimson uniforms stood at attention along the walls. Hundreds of guests packed tight inside rows of velvet-upholstered chairs, were gentlemen in white vests and silver belt buckles. Along with ladies in brocade gowns and pearls, the names of half the kingdom gathered inside the very same room. At the end of the hall, beneath a marble archway carved with the Hawthorne family crest, stood there His Grace Lucian Hawthorne, the Duke of Ravenshire. White silk, gold thread waiting for his bride, then the grand doors at the end of the hall burst open. No announcement, no usher, only the slow creaking of oak hinges, and then a silence enveloped the entire space and atmosphere of the feast. The silence falling upon a room when something undeniable had just walked in. Standing at the threshold was a woman whom every soul in the grand hall recognized. And not a single person expected to meet again in this feast. That was Lady Isadora Ashford, the first wife abandoned by the Duke, the woman whom all of London had whispered about throughout 7 years as a barren creature. She wore midnight blue silk, a simple cut, the hemline of her gown trimmed with a thin silver thread. Black hair bunched neatly at the nape of her neck. She wore no jewelry on her neck, she did not need it, and surrounding her, small hands carefully clutching tight onto the edge of her skirt, were 3 little boys, not past 4 years old, wearing identical white and blue uniforms, 3 small faces, looking straight forward, calm, not afraid. A gasp spread through the grand hall like wind blowing through a field of wheat. Because every face in that room, when looking closely, saw the same near unbelievable truth. The 3 little boys carried the Hawthorne forehead. The black eyes of Hawthorne, the unmistakable jawline of the Duke himself now was repeated 3 times, miniaturized, beside the woman whom he himself had cast away. At the altar the face of the Duke of Ravenshire turned the exact color of the marble block behind his back. His hand tightened around the gilded railing. The orchestra on the balcony went silent mid-tune. Even the candles in that moment appeared to dim. The woman whom he had branded Barren had returned, and she did not return alone. If you think you guessed how this story concludes, you are mistaken. Because what led to this moment was much more painful than you imagine. And what occurred subsequent to that was even more powerful than that. Before we go further, leave a comment letting me know if you love stories about trampled women rising up to reclaim their truth. Press subscribe and turn on the notification bell. For now, join me back into the story. We must go backward, 7 years prior in a stormy October night, and a fateful meeting inside the woods, to understand why Lady Isadora Ashford came to stand before that door today. Chapter 1. The manor house possessing no heir 7 years prior to that wedding, Ravenshire Manor stood imposing as one of the great domains of southern England. Stone walls were faded by the rain and wind of 2 centuries. Fruit orchards stretched out wide vast park areas, a long winding line of red oak trees led to the iron gates. A building not needing to announce its power, because simply power was living there. His Grace the Duke of Ravenshire inherited it at 26 years old. A tall man, well-built physique, sharp face, possessing a gaze that rarely softened. From his early years of life, he had been taught a single truth higher than all other truths. A manor like Ravenshire must be continued. The title must pass from father to son. A duke possessing no heir was a duke possessing a name that was dying gradually. He married Lady Isadora Ashford when she was 21 years old. She was the daughter of the Earl of Westmere, an ancient title in Yorkshire, with a lineage that had survived 6 centuries. Their marriage was arranged by the 2 families, but during the first year, an unexpected thing blossomed between them. A quiet but real affection. Isadora was not the type of woman filling the room with noise. She filled it with attention. She remembered the name of each servant. She listened, truly listened when her husband spoke. And for a time the Duke believed that he was the luckiest person. They lived happily, and the manor was filled with the warmth of love, along with the romance of the young couple. But those years passed away rapidly. 1 year became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 6. Without a single child being born, the aristocratic society began to notice, in the way society always notices. Smiles lingering too long. Conversations falling into silence when the Duchess of Ravenshire entered the room. During an autumn hunt in the 6th year, the Earl of Ashbourne patted Lucian's shoulder and spoke, half joking and half serious. "Still no heir, your grace. Continuing at this rate, I fear you must leave the domain to your cousin." Laughter erupted from the surrounding gentlemen. The Duke only smiled coldly, but those words crawled into his heart, remained there and decayed gradually inside it. His mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenshire, sent letters from the dower house twice each month. The Hawthorne name is not permitted to fade, Lucian. A duchess unable to fulfill her sole mission is not worthy of being a duchess. Each letter narrowed his vision until he no longer saw the woman who had been beside him for 6 years. He only saw the empty cradle inside the nursery room on the upper floor. Isadora suggested, gently and multiple times, that they should together go to meet a doctor. But Lucian refused each time. He was a Hawthorne. A Hawthorne could not lower himself to be examined like livestock at a market. Mistaken, completely mistaken, because he himself had decided long before any doctor could speak that it lay with her. On a cold night at the end of October, which was also the 7th year of the marriage, Lucian entered her private room for the final time with the status of a husband. She was sitting beside the fireplace, a shawl around her shoulders, reading a small book beneath the candlelight. He did not greet her in the way he had done throughout 7 years. He spoke directly. "It has been 7 years, milady." She looked up gently, replying, "Yes, Your Grace, 7 years in this manner still possesses no heir." She slowly folded the book. "Lucian, we have spoken regarding this matter already. Go along with me to meet a doctor. If there is anything wrong, there is nothing to ask at all." His voice did not rise. There was no need to, but inside that voice was a certainty in a powerful way, as if he had silently put forward the decision prior to entering. "I know where the fault lies. I have known for a long time." She stood up. The shawl fell off her shoulders. "You cannot know that there is no examination. None. I have no intention to be examined." He said, "I am a Hawthorne. I am not a failure." The entire room appeared to shrink in that moment. Fire crackled in the hearth. Somewhere at the end of the hallway, a grandfather clock chimed 11 o'clock. "I have not failed you," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "I have been beside you in each hour and each minute of these 7 years. I endured what your mother wrote. I endured what society whispered, and not a single time, in all of those things, caused me to possess thoughts or actions failing you." Yet he replied, "This manor still possesses no heir." He walked to the writing desk beside the window, drew out a piece of paper. Lucian pulled the inkwell toward himself, and he began to write, each stroke steady, with the controlled hand of a man already too familiar with writing, signing. But now that familiarity was spending for the drafting of an unfamiliar contract. She looked at him, not believing her eyes. "What are you doing?" "I am writing to my solicitor. The marriage will be resolved by separation. Arrangements will be set out so that you possess an allowance suitable for your father's family. You will leave Ravenshire tomorrow morning." He spoke while sealing the letter with the Hawthorne family crest imprinted on red wax. And he did not look at her a single time further. Chapter 2. The silent departure. Lucian turned around, leaving her room in a cold way, not looking further nor speaking further. The door closed behind his back with the soft but decisive sound of a sentence just pronounced. For a long period of time, Lady Isadora did not move. She was near motionless in place. One side of her body was warmed by the fireplace, the other side was chilled by the night. There was no sound of crying, because there was a thing even deeper and more painful than crying. The stillness of a woman just told that the past 7 years of her life were a misunderstanding, that now she must bear by herself. When she finally moved, it was not panic. She calmly walked toward the wardrobe. Inside hung the dresses of a duchess. London silk, lion brocade, a pale yellow evening gown she wore during the Christmas feast last year. She did not take that yellow dress. She did not take the silk dresses. She only took the simple traveling dresses that she brought from her father's house. Linen fabric, her mother's small jewelry box, a frayed poetry book, a locket she wore on her wedding day. Everything remaining, it did not truly belong to her. It belonged to the position of the lady of the Hawthorne family. Therefore she did not carry them along. When the trunk closed, she sat down on the edge of the bed and removed the wedding ring from her finger. She placed it onto the small table beside the writing desk, where her husband had just sealed the abandonment with red wax. The ring, the letter, like two halves of a closed door. She did not sleep that night. She chose to leave before the entire house woke up. A solitary carriage already waited at the side door. The carriage was arranged not by the Duke, rather by Mrs. Howe, the housekeeper who had served the Hawthorne family throughout 30 years. The old lady slipped into Isadora's hand a small money pouch. Speaking nothing, only a very long, very deep look. The look that a woman gives to another woman, when there are no words large enough to describe. Isadora stepped onto the carriage. The coachman jerked the reins. Wheels rolled on gravel. She did not turn back to look at Ravenshire. Turning back to look meant giving her husband one more moment of sorrow, which he did not deserve. The road toward the south took 2 days. She did not cry inside the carriage. She watched the countryside pass by, hedgerows turning brown for the winter, smoke rising from the chimneys of cottages. She realized, The world still did not change at all, because of the fact that her marriage had just concluded inside it. When finally the carriage arrived at the small village of Wraithmere in Hertfordshire, Isadora stepped down onto the road and looked up at the modest brick house of her deceased father's younger sister, Lady Cordelia Marchwood, the widow of a baronet, a woman who left high society 20 years prior to live a peaceful, simple life among her books and her rose bushes. In place of lavish feasts, expensive dresses, Lady Cordelia opened the door before her niece could knock. She looked at Isadora once, the pale face, the simple traveling cloak, the trunk too small to contain the entire life of a duchess. And she did not ask a single question. She only opened wide her arms to welcome her, and for the first time since her room door closed at Ravenshire, Lady Isadora Ashford permitted herself to burst into tears. Chapter 3: The Sentence That Was Never Pronounced. The first weeks in Wraithmere passed inside a soft, gentle mist. Lady Cordelia asked little. Never did she ask her what had occurred, the reason why. All consisted only of hot pots of tea beside the fireplace, strolls inside the kitchen garden, evenings reading aloud from a frayed Pope volume. She permitted her to open her heart on her own, letting the story come on its own inside its hour. And it arrived on an early night of December, when a storm struck along with the sound of rain beating heavily against the window. Isadora recounted the story without embellishment. 7 years, the whispers, the letters of the Dowager Duchess, the night of abandonment, the red wax seal on the writing desk, the ring placed down beside it. Lady Cordelia sat listening in silence, not interrupting. When her niece finished recounting, she sat in silence for another long moment. Then she spoke with a precision that surprised her niece. "My dear, you accepted a sentence that no court has ever pronounced." Isadora looked up. "You took his words as a doctor's diagnosis, you took his pride as a truth of nature, and you spent 7 years believing that you were the one at fault. Tell me, my niece, in all that period of time, did any doctor examine you? Has anyone in 7 years looked at you with the cold eye of medicine and said, 'Right, milady, the fault lies with you or not'?" Isadora did not reply immediately. She tried to remember, but inside her memory she remembered no one at all. "There was no one," she spoke softly. "Then we will correct that matter." A week subsequent to that rainy night, Lady Cordelia invited an old friend, Dr. Whitstable, a physician trained at Edinburgh, serving the good families in Hertfordshire with a discretion that won much quiet trust. A man past 60, silver-haired, with a calm, non-narrating voice. He examined Isadora through 2 medical visits, with the gentleness of a person always treating his patient like a relative, not like scandals. When he sat along with her inside the drawing room, subsequent to the second examination, he spoke without hesitation. "Milady, you possess excellent health. I find not any single condition, whether regarding body or constitution, that can prevent you from bearing children. If a 7-year marriage yielded no child at all, then I must speak plainly. The origin of the difficulty lies not with you." Those words struck her like a wave that did not knock down. A wave lifting her up gently and placing her down at a slightly different place. She spoke not for a moment. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. The doctor waited, with the patience of his profession. Finally, Isadora brought a hand up to her mouth. Her eyes were full of water, and the tears falling down were not the tears of sorrow. They were the tears of a woman who tried to hold tight onto it throughout 7 years. Because of bearing upon herself a sentence belonging not to herself. "I have never," she whispered, "been what he said I was." "No, milady," the doctor gently spoke. "You have never been so." Lady Cordelia, sitting beside, spoke nothing. She only reached out her hand, squeezing her niece's hand between her 2 hands. That night, Isadora stood beside the window of the small bedroom her aunt had designated for her. The storm had passed away. The moon hung round and white above the orchard. She watched her silhouette inside the dark, cold glass pane. And for the first time in 7 years, she did not see herself as a failed wife. She saw an ordinary woman, being a woman completely able to assume the maternal vocation inside the future. Simple like that, she was a woman who had been deceived, a woman who began, finally, to understand herself again. Chapter 4: The Stranger in the Rain and the Cruelty. The subsequent months brought a slow, careful reconstruction to her own life subsequent to the 7-year marriage, subsequent to what she did not belong to. Isadora did not return to high society. She did not write letters to old friends. She lived quietly under her own family name. She helped Lady Cordelia tend the rose garden. She took strolls on the village roads of Wraithmere in the early morning, when the village was still half asleep. She slept properly for the first time in multiple years. Wraithmere was only 9 miles away from one of the small hunting lodges of the royal family. A modest brick house named Greythorn, used by the royal family when the king wished to hunt inside the southern woods, without needing the rituals of the main castles. In the autumn of Isidora's second year in Raithmere, the king arrived at Greythorn. King Cassian II, who at that time was at 30 years of age. He had ascended the throne 5 years prior, subsequent to the death of his elder brother. He had not yet taken a wife. The royal family urged him continuously regarding that matter. But they were continuously rejected by him. He had witnessed his brother's political marriage become a marriage of cold rooms. And rituals even colder than that, and he decided, despite the advice of every duke or royal nobleman, that he would only marry when he saw something worthy of marriage. Or he would never marry when hunting. Cassian carried along only 2 attendants. He wore the simple coat of a country gentleman. He gave his name when necessary as Cassian Vane. It was during one such journey that destiny brought him to meet Isidora. That morning Isidora went further than usual out of the village, into a red oak forest that she guessed belonged to the royal family. A sudden October rain shower struck, and she sheltered beneath an old oak tree. While she was absorbed in wringing rainwater from her cloak, a rider galloped out from between the tree trunks. A tall man inside a green coat, hat pulled low. His horse was soaked because of the rain. He gripped the reins hard when he saw her. For a moment, the 2 people looked at each other in silence. "Milady," finally he said, lifting his hat. "Pray forgive me, I did not expect someone here." "I too, sir," she replied. He dismounted his horse. He offered to give his coat to her as an apology and the courtesy of a gentleman. But she refused with a light smile. Cassian began first by politely asking if she was lost. She said no. She lived at the village behind the woods. He asked her name. She spoke. Lady Isidora Ashford. He also spoke his name, Cassian Vane, a guest at the hunting lodge. Then they together walked toward the village. He noticed a few things regarding her and remembered later. That she spoke softly but did not at all bow her face or lower her gaze. That when he made a dry joke, she replied with a drier sentence. That she did not ask regarding his business, not curious about his title, also completely appeared to possess no care regarding the matter of how much he could be worth. He returned to Raithmere 3 days later, and 3 days later again, and once more. It was Lady Cordelia, in the 3rd week of these visits, who pulled her niece backward inside the kitchen garden and whispered, "My dear, the gentleman visiting, I have known many people possessing status in life. And that man gives me the feeling of not being Cassian Vane." Isidora was silent for a long moment. "I know," she said. She had known near completely since the 2nd visit. The way he stood, the way the attendants waiting at the village inn showed reverence to him. The very horse he rode also wore a harness set too beautiful for a country gentleman. She only did not speak it out, because the moment she spoke it out, the normalcy perhaps would be forced to conclude. And that conclusion arrived subsequent to a week. When he arrived alone, he sat with her inside the small drawing room, and he spoke, with a frankness near resembling an apology. "Milady, I have not been honest with you. My real name is Cassian King, Cassian II. Isidora did not cry out. She did not stand up. She looked at him across the rim of her teacup for a long moment. Then she placed the cup down. "I once wondered, Your Majesty, inside this room, I wish to be permitted to be Cassian." "Then inside this room, you will be so," she returned. He arrived back and arrived back again. Then he decided to propose to her, not the way a king proposes to a subject, rather the way a man proposes to a woman possessing a soul that he learned to cherish higher than even his crown. One day he asked about her past. She recounted it to him all. She did not soften it. She did not seek sympathy. She recounted it in the way a person recounts a story belonging to the past. Now that story no longer affected her. When she finished recounting, he spoke solely this sentence. "That man is a fool, and I am secretly grateful for that foolishness of his. Because it placed you inside this room with me." When finally he proposed to her, he proposed in a straightforward way. A winter morning, inside Lady Cordelia's garden, with snow covering the rose branches. "I have been acquainted with many ladies inside this entire country," he said. "And not a single person spoke to me like you. Marry me, Isidora, not because I am the king, but despite the fact that I am the king, I am simply Cassian toward you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke simply, "Yes, Cassian, I will do so." They married within a year inside the private chapel of St. James's Palace, with guests of honor numbering only about 20 people, being individuals truly close acting as witnesses. The country was informed subsequent to that, and the country, this time, clapped hands applauding inside joy because of the king's decision. 18 months subsequent to that quiet wedding, in the spring of the 3rd year of the new life, Queen Isidora gave birth to 3 sons inside the very same night. 3 triplets, all healthy, all robust, all crystallized from pure love, not because of titles, not because of duty or any pressure of Isadora and Cassian. But the truth was all 3 of those boys were 3 princes of the kingdom. The entire kingdom, when hearing the news reported from the long-ringing bells of London, down to the smallest village church, called it a miracle. As for Isadora alone, she called it the result of love and truth. Though arriving late, finally it arrived, during the years subsequent to Lady Isadora quietly disappearing from his life. His Grace the Duke of Ravenshire did not fare better. Lucian had thought, when abandoning her, that the problem would be resolved at the longest within 2 years. A new wife, a new son, the continuation of the Hawthorne lineage would be commenced. But the truth was it did not close. Within a year subsequent to Isadora's departure, Lucian associated with a viscount's daughter, and 6 months subsequent she quietly informed him that there was no child at all. Within 2 years there was a brief and bitter betrothal with Lady Caroline. But that engagement also was cancelled when she too returned from a holiday, in a peaceful countryside, without any good news for him. A third arrangement, never announced, also concluded with a settlement sum and a written promise to keep silent. The whispers commenced at first little light, then over time it no longer remained light. By the 5th year subsequent to Isadora leaving, all the drawing rooms in London had begun to speculate, with a tone that gentlemen did not at all like to hear, that perhaps the trouble belonged to the Ravenshire side, rather than lying at all with the wife. Duke Lucian Hawthorne heard all those whispers, and he reacted in the exact way he reacted to everything causing him discomfort. By greater pride, by colder eyes inside feasts, by the iron belief that the subsequent attempt would cause all of London to shut its mouth. Inside that mood he obtained the hand of Lady Verity Ashbourne. Lady Verity was the sole daughter of the Earl of Ashbourne. Young, beautiful in the cold style of the fashion models of that season. Possessing a distant blood relation, through her mother's line with the royal family. But though so distant that the relationship near possessed no practical meaning. Verity's wedding with the Duke of Ravenshire would be one of the great marriages of the decade. Lucian planned the wedding with the precision of a campaign. Every duke, every marquess, every earl possessing status in the southern regions would all be invited to attend. In person, the Archbishop of Canterbury would officiate, with the number of guests rising up to 500 guests. Near 1,000 candles, with that ostentation and lavishness the Duke intended. That would be a wedding extinguishing every whisper of the 7 years of marriage with Isadora. And these years subsequent to her leaving, and in the process of planning, he put forward a decision that he believed this would be the seal for his victory in the most complete way. He told the engraver to prepare, inside the 500 invitation cards, 1 additional card, written with the very same gold handwriting, sealed with the very same red wax mark, carried for delivery by a servant wearing a uniform. Sent to Lady Isadora Ashford, the name she carried prior to marriage. Also the name that at this very hour Lucian chose to use like a small private cruelty, at the modest house of her aunt in Wraithmere. He sat at the desk for a long moment subsequent to sealing. He smiled very thin, beneath his thumb placed on the wax. He imagined the scene of her receiving the card, imagined her hands trembling when reading, imagined her tears of pain and regret, but he did not know, nor could he imagine that the address on that card, at that time, was a forwarding address. That Lady Isadora Ashford no longer lived in Wraithmere. That the invitation card would travel 40 additional miles further, to a completely different manor. That when finally arriving in the hands of the recipient, it would be opened not by an abandoned Duchess, rather by the Queen of England. Isadora read it. She read it twice, then she placed it down onto the table beside the silver inkstand inside her private writing room, and she smiled. A small and quiet smile to the extent that her private maid, standing watching from the threshold, would be unable to describe for multiple years subsequent to that. She would come to attend. Of course she would come to attend. Chapter 5. The door opens twice. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the gravel driveway to Ravenshire Manor already packed tight with carriages. The family crests on the doors of the carriages read like a roll call of the kingdom. Ashbourne, Marchwood, Greythorne, Belrose, Pendleton, Hertford noblemen inside white vests and gold-buckled shoes stepped up the marble steps inside a slow stream. By 11 o'clock, the grand hall already packed tight with people. 500 guests sat on rows of velvet chairs along the long aisle. The orchestra on the balcony played softly. The Archbishop, inside white and gold vestments, stood at the altar beneath the marble archway carved with the Hawthorne family crest. Beside him, standing straight and pale, was His Grace the Duke of Ravenshire, inside white silk and gold thread. The bride was expected to arrive at 11:30. At 11:20, the grand doors at the end of the hall began to open. The orchestra prepared to raise their voices, the guests stood up, every head turned back, and what they saw was not the bride. What they saw was Lady Isadora Ashford. She stood at the threshold inside the midnight blue silk dress. Simple cut, soon at the hemline of the gown a silver thread so thin that it caught the candlelight like frost. She wore no jewelry on her neck, black hair bunched neatly, and surrounding her, small hands carefully clutching onto the edge of her skirt, were 3 little boys, not past 4 years old, wearing identical white and blue uniforms. The grand hall did not cease resounding with gasps. Then the entire grand hall suddenly became silent, the silence inside which a man could hear, clearly the sound of his own heart beating. At the altar, the face of the Duke of Ravenshire now had turned the exact color of the marble block behind his back. Lady Verity, not yet entering the grand hall, was waiting inside the foyer along with her father. She would know inside a moment what was going on inside. But this moment she did not yet know. Lady Isadora began to step forward, slowly, along the long aisle. The 3 little boys walking beside her also stepped slowly along. Small, steady, looking at no one, the guests on both sides turned completely around, as each single face gradually recognized the hawthorn forehead, the hawthorn black eyes, the unmistakable jawline of the Duke himself, repeated 3 times miniaturized beside the woman he had cast into the October mist 5 years prior. The whispers commenced. They rose because not a single gathered person could keep silent before a thing like that. She did not go to the altar. She stopped midway along the aisle and turned around lightly to face the end of the hall, and then the grand doors opened for the second time. This time there was an announcement, the voice of the royal herald, who had waited ready inside the foyer according to instructions that not a single servant of Ravenshire was permitted to question. His Majesty, King Cassian II, Her Majesty the Queen Isadora, along with Prince Adrian, Prince Edmund and Prince Theodore, princes of the Kingdom of Great Britain. The entire grand hall did not gasp anymore. Now the entire grand hall immediately knelt down completely. 500 noblemen, consisting of the gentlemen, ladies of the kingdom, bowed themselves down inside a rustling wave of silk and brocade. The Archbishop of Canterbury, at the altar, lowered himself, kneeling one knee on the marble. The Duke of Ravenshire stood frozen, his complexion now turned completely white. His eyes glued tight onto the woman inside the midnight blue gown just announced, inside his very own grand hall, before the highest powers of the country, as the Queen of England. The 3 little boys beside her, being Prince Adrian, Prince Edmund, Prince Theodore, were the 3 heirs to the throne. King Cassian II stepped alone along the long aisle. He did not kneel, he advanced to stand beside his wife and his children. He glanced, only once, at the Duke of Ravenshire, then did not look further at any single person else. "My Queen Isadora," he spoke softly to his queen, "do you wish for us to continue? I wish for us to remain for one more moment." "Your Majesty," she said, "there remains a matter needing to be answered." She turned around, looking toward Duke Lucien. Lady Verity, informed by a maid running out from the grand hall with the news, she arrived at the door of the foyer. She heard the announcement, she saw the kneeling room. She saw, finally, the 3 small faces beside the queen. And she understood everything inside. That moment, she entered the grand hall. Hundreds of pairs of eyes followed her. She passed through the kneeling guests. She passed through Isadora. She walked to the altar. She stopped before the Duke of Ravenshire, and she looked at him inside a long, slow moment. Then slowly, she removed from her finger the diamond and ruby-set engagement ring that he had given to her 3 months prior, and she placed it down onto the gilded railing of the altar. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was clear enough to echo to the end of the hall. "You told me that that woman had no capacity to bear children. You told me that you were made to suffer by an unworthy wife. You told me that your house was cursed by her barrenness, and that I would be the person releasing it from the shame." She looked down at the ring on the railing. "I do not yet know who was the person made to suffer inside this house, Your Grace, but I can see now very clearly that it was not you. I will not be the second woman bearing the lie that you dare not face." Verity turned around. She walked backward along the aisle. She did not look at her father. Not looking at Isadora, she walked through the grand doors into the autumn light. And the grand doors closed behind her back. Duke Lucien Hawthorne did not move. King Cassian turned around, with the queen on his arm, and the 3 small princes still clutching tight onto their mother's skirt since the moment of appearance. And they too walked backward along the long aisle. They spoke nothing further. They did not stop. The royal carriage was waiting at the foot of the steps. The grand hall did not stand up from the kneeling posture until they had gone out of sight. Chapter 6. The forgiveness she owed. Not the story of that morning merged into the wind and traveled throughout the kingdom within a week. The Duke of Ravenshire, Duke Lucian Hawthorne, appeared not in high society for 3 months. The Hawthorne family crest was not seen at court. The shutters of Ravenshire Manor were pulled to block near all of the autumn light. When finally people saw him return, it was inside the clinic of Dr. Whitstable in Hertfordshire, the very physician who multiple years prior returned to Lady Isadora the knowledge of the truth regarding her health. The doctor examined the Duke with the same gentleness, the same precision, the same refusal to judge. When finished, he spoke to His Grace frankly as having once spoken to her. "Your Grace, the difficulty lies not with any wife you married, nor with any woman you knew. As I suspected for a long time, the difficulty lies with yourself." Lucian replied not for a long period of time. He only looked down in silence at the floor of the doctor's small drawing room. When finally he raised his head, his face was the face of a man whose entire life had been written on the wrong page, inside the wrong book. It took an additional 6 months subsequent to that, before he obtained an audience with the Queen. He was granted permission. He arrived at a private drawing room of St. James's Palace on a grey afternoon. He wore a plain black suit, carrying no servants. He arrived alone, as he should have arrived in every confrontation of his life. Queen Isadora received him in a standing posture. She wore no crown, she did not need it. He knelt on one knee onto the parquet floor. "Your Majesty, Queen Isadora, Your Majesty." He raised not his face. "I will not beg for Your Majesty's forgiveness. I have lived long enough to understand that people do not ask for forgiveness like asking for a favor. I came here solely to speak the thing that I should have spoken inside my own house 7 years prior. The fault was mine, the lie was mine, the cruelty was mine. The years Your Majesty bore it were not your debt. That was a debt I forced you to bear. I came here today to take it back." She let him kneel for an additional moment. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. A piece of coal shifted inside the hearth. Then she spoke. "Softly stand up, Your Grace." He stood up. She looked at him. For the first time since the night he sealed her abandonment with red wax, she looked at him fully. Not like the husband who abandoned her, not like the Duke who sought to humiliate her, rather like a man who spent a lifetime believing inside his own importance. And finally was forced to place that belief down onto the floor between the two of them. "I forgive you, Your Grace," she said. "I forgive you not because you deserve it. I forgive you because I need not your forgiveness, need not your acknowledgement, need not your repentance to live my life. I forgive you because I have nothing left of yours to bear any more. And I do not wish to pick that emptiness up once again, even to refuse you. Go in peace, return not." He bowed and withdrew. The doors of the drawing room closed behind his back. Queen Isadora stood beside the window for a long moment subsequent to that. The autumn light spread golden over the gardens of St. James's Palace. Somewhere inside the palace, 3 little boys laughed aloud. A sound she had once been told would never be heard, inside a manor that told her she was nothing at all. She had been told many things inside life by men who knew very little. She turned from the window and went to find her children.